I suppose there are some sorts of insanity. Some of the modern psychiatrists, I understand, even say that there are certain kinds of insanity that seem to be due to disorders of the senses. They've discovered that by giving people tranquilizers, that the preceptors of, or the perceptors, I mean, that's the word, the perceptors are hyper. That is, there are some people who seem to, the physical world impinges on them to such a high degree that their minds can't take it. They're so sensitive. And they discovered that if they give them drugs that simply dull their receptors, that they're cured, or at least that the symptoms are alleviated. But here, I think, we have a disease which is not of the senses or of the imagination. We have to go all the way to the intellect itself. That is, if you take the position that there's no such thing as a mystery, that the human mind is absolutely adequate to the understanding of everything, you're going to come up with with a kind of insanity very much like this. After all, suppose you thought that suppose you think that the human mind is adequate to love, which he thought. Well, there is no such thing, which is what he said. And that is, he eliminates it. Well, then, what becomes of the relation between men and women? It becomes some kind of a horror. That is, you couldn't.
Yes, it becomes the opposite of something that brings some sort of pleasure or some degree of happiness. It becomes something actually painful. It turns on itself as a result.
It would be like, to try to give a kind of exaggerated example, it would be like trying to dance without the music. Have you ever tried that? I remember as a kid when we used to take lessons on how to dance. Now, that's going out of style because apparently people don't care about steps anymore. But once upon a time, we had to learn how to do foxtrot or learn how to do the waltz. And so the teacher would make a diagram and say, now, the basis of this step is just you put your left foot here, and then I think it's just bad teaching, incidentally, but this is the way one of the ways they used to teach it. And so you'd have to make the steps without the music, and physically you get worn out. I mean exhausted, physically exhausted inside of 5 minutes. You couldn't lift your feet. You realize how much physical exertion goes into a dance? I mean, just pure energy is expended, but the music lifts you up and gives it its reason. Well, to make love without love would physically lead to the necessity of a drug, of a stimulant. I think that's true. That is, you simply couldn't go on with it, and that's what happens.
Once again, to go back to that idea of the implications of a scientific philosophy of life. Science is based on the idea that you can control nature. That is, if your mind is adequate to nature, then it means that you can control it. As again, we said that it's entirely external view of nature. There's nothing, no intrinsic principle inside of nature. So, we learn about it from the outside, and then we can control it from the outside. But what you inevitably, and in order to even think about nature in that way, you have to eliminate all of those things that are really beyond your control. That is, such things as human freedom to act.
So spontaneity and response.
Yeah.
In love, there could be no response.
Right. Everything has to be controlled, you see. Love itself, we say, is something that's free. That it's something that people can either do or not do. But it is an act. It's an act of the will to love. But if it's something that can be controlled, then it means it's something that can be manipulated, and you lose the very thing that makes love so precious, is that spontaneity and that freedom. And the trouble is that with that kind of a philosophy, you have to simply close your eyes to the greater part of reality and pretend that it isn't there. But of course that doesn't work. Reality is still there, and it keeps appearing to you. You see it in other people. That is, you see people who don't believe that love can be manipulated or controlled, and they're happy in their love. They don't have this bitterness, this experience of bitterness and rejection of love at all. And yet they're just ordinary, simple people who understand that love is a mysterious thing.
No, it is. It's a disease of the intellect. If you could, another variety of this. There were writers at the end of the 19th century, especially in England. One of the most famous of them was the great poet Matthew Arnold, who suggested in some of his books that really he wasn't at all sure that God existed, but that it was socially necessary to have him. That is, we have to have religion in the interests of a decent society. Well, imagine having a religion without God. That is, imagine worshiping without an object. How could you do that? The mind really boggles at it, at a great celebration with nothing to celebrate. A holiday which isn't holy. A Sunday which has no reason to be a Sunday. It's just a division of the week. Oh, we have this problem today.
Well, that's right, exactly.
We have a world today which cannot take a holiday. It has only vacations, which is a very good word, a vacuity, an emptiness, rather than a holiday. There's nothing to celebrate.
Someone has used the phrase, a modern philosopher has used the phrase to describe our times as the hollow universe. That is, a universe that has all of the external appearances that have always been there, and all of the external forms, such as the Sunday and the holidays of the year, and marriage and love and families and all that sort of thing. But the interior is gone from it. It doesn't have any insides anymore. It's hollow. It's been hollowed out. And the people continue to go through the motions, but they don't get any. They should be things. We're talking about those things which have always been regarded as sources of comfort and of happiness, and yet they don't give those things. They don't bring those things. They don't bring joy anymore. And the reason is that they've lost their inside. We're just, everything is simply superficial.
I mean, you do wonder what the famous actress does when she gets married for the 8th time. I mean, what does that mean? She gets all dressed up. She wears white. She goes through a ceremony where she says, "Till death do us part," and they exchange rings, and they do all this, and they say, "Isn't it wonderful? Isn't this wonderful?" And they drink champagne, but they know that that's not real. They know that they're acting out a charade. I don't know, but we live in a world very much like the one that Lucretius describes, and we see it. It has certain characteristics, and one of them is violence. That is, it seems that if you give yourself over to acting something out without the reason for acting it out, without that interior reason, without the mystery, that you have to increase the dose in order to feel it, in order to experience it. We see this in every walk of life. The exaggeration of the thing in order to have it at all. I went to a circus the other day, and it was really very sad and yet still marvelous. But I thought of the audience. They didn't applaud much. That is, it didn't seem to them very much that a girl was suspended by her husband's teeth from up there on the top of a pole. They seem, they're jaded with those things. They've seen them on television.
Yeah.
And I noticed very little applause, very little appreciation for what was being done. That is, it has to be more spectacular. It has to be when once upon a time a circus would wipe out a town for a year. People were just bowled over to see the wonder of a circus.
Just to see a live elephant.
Oh yeah,
or tiger.
An elephant. Yeah, they paraded in the elephants.
Yeah.
Nobody even looked at them.
Yeah.
Nobody even looked at them.
Yeah, they've all seen all the elephants in the world, and not only that,
They want dinosaurs.
They've seen dinosaurs. That's just what I was going to say. Yeah, they've seen dinosaurs, and they've seen animals that nobody has ever seen in the whole history of the world. They've seen monsters that have been made up.
When you get into that state, you have to increase the dosage. It has to get in this little circus. Boy, it was on its last legs. And the announcer said, "What do you call him? The ringmaster." I made a terrible slip. Announcer. He was a ringmaster. He said, "Now our trapeze artist is going to do the most daring feat of all on the high trapeze. He's going to do the triple somersault." Yes. Well, nobody even blinked, and he did it. But that's nothing. They expected to see a
quintuple. Yeah. But no one's ever done that. As far as I know, triple.
No.
That's what they were doing back when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Was the triple. That was the big thing.
But it was ho hum. This little guy up there flipping. But gee, we're not astonished anymore. And I think it does come from this philosophy. That is, if there isn't any intrinsic wonder, then you have to, every time you do it, you have to do something else. It has to be more and more and more spectacular. And we certainly find this in the relation between men and women. And that is the triple, the quadruple. Marriage just becomes a kind of gymnastic, and it has to be turned into some kind of hype. And of course, in doing so, it becomes violent. And that is physical. Finally, gets beyond the bounds of the human body. I don't suppose I've made that clear, but if you have to increase the light more and more and more, there's a point when it'll burn your eyes out.
Well,
it goes beyond.
Yeah.
After all, the word violence means destructive of the human organ. That's what it means.
The sound is another good example.
Yeah.
That is,
the rock and roll.
We turn up the volume. We want the volume to be higher and higher and higher. We crave it. A soft sound is not satisfying. We crave loud sounds because they affect our senses directly. They give us an immediate jolt of excitement. It's the same with horror movies or violence in the movies. We have to have the loud explosions, fires, bloodbaths, because the ordinary experience of any kind of just an ordinary conflict is not enough. We crave this increase of sensation.
I think that explains, to get back directly on the track, we've been wandering, but we're not really off the point. We've been circling around it. Doesn't that explain the last passage in this poem? That is, Lucretius is outdoing himself. That is, it's the most spectacular thing that he can do. It's the description of a plague where the most horrifying tortures occur. But isn't that what you have to do if you once take the route? After all, a quiet scene. Think of Socrates sitting by the Ulysses, talking about the meaning of love with Phaedrus, his student, with his bare feet in the cold water. Gee, what's that? That's so dull. Here we have something spectacular. Let's make a statement here. All art moves toward the condition of the plague. This is a parody of a famous sentence by an English writer of the 19th century who said all art moves toward the condition of music. He was very serious about it. I'm being satirical, but I think the point is true. That is, if you once get on this track of sensation for its own sake, that is, that the world is nothing but the physical, and that there is no spiritual meaning, there is no significance to things, but only the things, then I think you really are going to end up with the plague. I think it's very significant that one of the most famous novels in the 20th century is called The Plague. Yeah. And I think almost every other book is in one way or another a plague.
Yeah, well, and he is talking. It is a kind of allegorical book. That is Albert Camus' book, The Plague. It's about some people say, well, it's about war, and I think that's true. But he's talking also about some interior plague that has come over the world and that comes back again.
Well, it's a philosophical book.
Yeah,
it's not a political book.
No, it's really philosophical.
You could read it on a political level.
Yeah.
But he's dealing with metaphysics.
Yeah.
He's saying it's a plague. The universe is a plague. Yeah. Existence is a plague.
Yeah. No, I was teaching just the other day. I'm teaching Homer, and I got to talking about all the recognition scenes that occur throughout the book. It's, as somebody has said, the book is a kind of riot of recognition, and that I got to talking about the identity of Odysseus and the identity of all of these people. That's one of those interior things, your identity, who you are. All of this mystery that we're talking about has to do with being. That is, it's what you are. You can't really control what is. You can control what things do. That's their external manifestation of what they are. You can affect the externals, but the internal part is there, and there isn't anything you can do about that. That's something you can't touch. You can't reach it. It remains. That is, a person's identity is something that you can only get close to under conditions of love. That is, insofar as the person permits you to approach that identity, you can approach it. Otherwise, they close the door, and that's it. You can't get any closer. All you get is the externals. But I was saying to the class that what you find in our times is a loss of identity altogether. That is, who are you? Well, people begin to fumble in their billfolds, and they say, well, here's my driver's license. That's me, in the picture there with describing my height and my weight and the color of my eyes, and and then you can go look up my file in the office and we'll tell you, who my parents are and all of that, and that's it. That's all there is, and you say, well, that's a kind of spiritual plague when you have people who have lost any sense of their own being.
That is the hollow universe.
The hollow universe, the hollow person.
That's T.S. Eliot's Hollow Man.
Yeah, the hollow man.
The same idea that we're figures, but we're not persons.
Functionaries, as they say. We have a job that we describe ourselves by, the job that we have, or how much money we make a year, but it doesn't have anything to do with us.
And in terms of art, that is of the poetic effect, a recognition scene, by definition, must be quiet.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point I was making. I said, now, the Odyssey...
It can't be spectacular.
No. The Odyssey is full of spectacular things, but, the episodes with the, the Cyclops or the Sirens, those are spectacular, but when Eurycleia learns who Odysseus is by when she's bathing his feet and sees that scar. That's a very quiet scene. It's a private scene. Of all places, when she's performing this, she's bathing his feet. A very ordinary, humble kind of act, and she makes this great discovery. I said, well, that's one of the most exciting, maybe it's the most exciting thing in the entire book, and yet it's very, very quiet. It isn't at all spectacular. And that's true of all those recognitions.
We need spectacle in order to make art attractive. It's true. But Aristotle does, in a very famous passage in the Poetics, say that the degeneration of art is the growth of spectacle.
Yeah.
It becomes melodrama, we say, rather than drama, and that it's the decadence of an art. You can use it as an indicator of decadence. That is the growth of spectacle. In, for example, in the United States today, music lovers will tell you that opera is in a very sad state. They now talk about the golden age of opera, which was back at the time of Caruso and the others in the, say, up to 1920. And then there was a silver age, which certainly lasted up until World War II. But that really, today, we're in a kind of decadence, and they prove it by the importance of the scene designer. Have you noticed that is the designer of the set is now more important than the conductor or the singer? They now advertise that a certain I'm not up on these things, but when they advertise in the paper that a new production of Aida is coming to town, they now put the name of the set designer, the fellow who makes the stage scenes, the lighting, and the spectacle. We call it the spectacle, what you can see with your eye. They now say that takes precedence over the rest. I suppose the growth of the movie is a proof of this. Cinema itself is a spectacular art.
But even the movie has changed. That is, there was a greater element of dialogue in the movie. Yes. In its early days, if you go to an old movie, it's one of the things that will strike you. You'll say, my gosh, there's a lot of conversation in there, often interesting and witty conversation. But that's now all.
But the wide screen and the
stereophonic sound.
The noise. You know, the last time I went to the movies, I couldn't stand it. They had that thing turned up so high.
Yeah.
The quadraphonic sound. And that's the exaggeration of spectacle. You could make a wonderful hour's conversation, or if you were a writer, even a whole book out of this. Quiet in Homer. Quiet scenes. I don't suppose nobody ever does. We all talk about spectacle in Homer. We go for the dramatic, but really, when you think about and to take Homer is to take a challenge, because he is a spectacular writer.
Right. Yeah.
He's not by definition a quiet man. But once you begin to think about it, there are scenes so restful. We read one of them. You remember when Hermes comes down at the beginning of the book.
Yes, and just looks at the island of Ogygia.
Yes. There's an example of a scene which is so, it's a lull in the whole poem, and yet so significant, so full. The meeting of Nausicaa and Odysseus. I don't think we did talk about that, but it's one of the most famous moments in the history of literature, and it's very quiet. Very simple. All of those quiet words.
Well, we use the cliche, eloquent silence, and that's really true. There is such a thing. Ajax in the Odyssey, when Odysseus goes down into the underworld, he meets Ajax, and Ajax died as a result of a quarrel that he and Odysseus had over the armor of Achilles. And Ajax is still mad. He still is bitter, upset, Odysseus makes a very generous speech. He tries to placate Ajax when he meets him there in the underworld. And Ajax just turns away. He says nothing. You could hear that silence of this great man who just he will not speak to Odysseus. That's a very, very moving scene. The same thing, of course, there's an imitation of it in Virgil, as there is everything. When Dido refuses to speak to Aeneas, she just turns away, pleads with her, he apologizes, he expresses grief and sorrow, and she just walks away from him.
Well, it's not imitated in Lucretius.
No.
That is, there's no silence in Lucretius. There is no quiet in Lucretius. Ironically enough, he seeks it. That is, he knows he hasn't got it. He talks about a kind of withdrawal from the world. That is, the deliberate act of the philosopher is to raise himself above the world. But that's because he believes that the world is nothing but noise. That is, there's no quiet in nature. You have to conquer nature. The philosopher has to be in control of his own quiet. The Lucretian garden, the celebration of the Epicurean garden, is a kind of a Disneyland. It's a world that you create yourself, because the world itself has. How does those famous lines go? They're of Matthew Arnold's. Neither joy, nor hope, nor love, nor freedom from pain. I should know them by heart. Do you know them?
No, I don't know them either now by heart.
Matthew Arnold has a poem, we mentioned him a few minutes ago, which is a very, very great poem.
Oh, it's a very Lucretian poem. That Dover Beach.
It's called Dover Beach, and you ought to read it. I mean, everyone ought to read it because it's so well done. And at the end of that poem, he says, love, let us be true to one another. Let us love. Because, and he contradicts himself in the very words, he said, because there isn't any love.
He says the world has no love.
No.
And we are but here as on a darkling plain where
ignorant armies clash by night. That's nature.
Ignorant armies clash by
night. And he lists the world has neither, and then he lists these things, and there they are. And Lucretius would say, the work of the philosopher is, therefore, to withdraw from the world. It's not easy to make this distinction. I know an awful lot of people who fail to see the difference between a contemplative saint and a Lucretian philosopher. They say, well, they both do the same thing. They withdraw from the world. And you say, that's because opposites look alike. These polarities that we find between the two views, the comic view or the tragic view. Yes, it's true. Lucretius, it sometimes gives you the idea that he's doing the same thing that St. Benedict did, but it's absolutely the opposite.
Maybe I ought to read the passage that's the most famous passage on this particular
on the contemplative
subject. This is the opening part of Book 2. And we have time here to read it and to talk about it just a little bit, but it's exactly what we have been talking about. And this is, I suppose, this particular passage is even more famous than the one I read before. This is the one that lots of people know by heart, really. He says, "What a joy it is when out at sea the storm winds are lashing the waters, to gaze from the shore at the heavy stress some other man is enduring. Not that anyone's afflictions are in themselves a source of delight, but to realize from what troubles you yourself are free is joy indeed. What joy again to watch opposing hosts marshaled on the field of battle, when you have yourself no part in their peril. But this is the greatest joy of all, to stand aloof in a quiet citadel, stoutly fortified by the teaching of the wise, and to gaze down from that elevation on others, wandering aimlessly in a vain search for the way of life, pitting their wits one against another, disputing for precedence, struggling night and day with unstinted efforts to scale the pinnacles of wealth and power. O joyless hearts of men, O minds without vision, how dark and dangerous the life in which this tiny span is lived away. Do you not see that nature is clamoring for two things only: a body free from pain, a mind released from worry and fear, for the enjoyment of pleasurable sensations?
How could you confuse that with St. Benedict, that last line?
Yeah, it comes to a perfect conclusion.
But nonetheless, the superficial, the externals are similar. And as you withdraw from the struggles of the world, that's true. There is a kind of Lucretian monastery, the garden. It came to be called
The Epicurean garden is the phrase.
Epicurus taught
in a garden.
In a garden. The ancient schools were named. That is, there was the Lyceum, and there was the Academy, and there was the garden. And the garden was the Epicurean school. But it's more than just an accident. That is, the Lucretian view, or the Epicurean view of philosophy, is that you must retire and build a wall between yourself and the world. And from the vantage point of that garden, look out at this miserable world. And from that contrast, you will gain a great consolation. You are free from all that.
It's the contrast between what you are enjoying is the absence of the pain and the struggle and the suffering and the futility and the ignorance that you can see the rest of the world is suffering from.
I mean, there's no doubt about it. The mythology is always true. Love is a wound. The most famous image of love is Cupid from classical antiquity, who shoots his arrow in, and he wounds you. And the person in love is someone who has been hurt. He becomes even more vulnerable. The minute you love somebody, there's just no question about it, you have opened up an infinite possibility of pain that you didn't have before. And as no one can ever hurt you as much as you can be hurt through the one you love. I always remember that line in Macbeth when Banquo? Who's the one whose little children get killed? Is it
not Banquo?
Or Gee, once you start naming names, it blows your memory. But he says to Macbeth, he says, someone says, well, take revenge on him.
He says to Malcolm, yeah.
He says, take revenge. And he says, I can't. He has no children. I can't do that to him because he has no children. That's a perfect example of it. The Epicurean says, what did you have children for, you damn fool? That is, anybody who has children is a fool because he can be hurt. Well, that's true.
A friend of mine always used to say to people would come up and say, well, my friend betrayed me. And he'd say, well, of course your friend can betray you, and it hurts when your friend betrays you. How would you feel if it were your enemy? I mean, of course, you say, well, your enemy always betrays you. There's no pain in that. You say, well, yeah, he's my enemy. But when your friend betrays you, you say, oh, what a terrible thing to
you don't have
be
love.
Betrayed by a friend.
The Epicurean has no love, has no friendship. He says so.
No, well, you see, he's isolated.
He's alone.
He's isolated, and the reason he is isolated is that the minute that you have friends, associates, companions, comrades, lovers, husbands, wives, children, all of that. Well, then you not only you can be hurt, but you certainly will be hurt.
I mean, God made a terrible mistake by having this nature of love, because God can be hurt. I mean, the crucifixion is a consequence of the nature of God. Lucretius says that's just all fantasy. There isn't any God. There isn't any love. There isn't anything in nature that has to do with love. That's all an illusion. I mean, if you get down to the bottom of it, in nature, lions don't love lionesses. That's all an illusion. There isn't any love. It's all hatred, as a matter of fact. It's all a dog-eat-dog world.
Yes. So they're doing that. It's all futile. It simply brings about an increase of pain. Those people are futilely seeking pleasure by the wrong means. What you need to do is to get a good, secure citadel, the tower. Get up in the tower. That's another figure that's here. That's the one that people remember. Get on the shore. Stay on the shore. Don't go out there in the ships, because the winds and the sea will you're in peril when you're out there. Stay in safety, and what you get, you'll notice, is a freedom from pain. That is, what he seeks is freedom from pain. It's a strange negative way of talking about joy. That is that joy, or even pleasure, consists of an absence of pain.
That's its definition.
Because, of course, the whole world consists of pain. You see, it really is a very gloomy view of the world. That's the tragic side of Lucretius. He says that the world is all wrong. He says, here we are. We're people who are made for pleasure, and yet the world is such, it's made in such a way, human nature itself seems to be made in such a way that it automatically frustrates that desire for pleasure and gives us nothing but pain. So what we have to do is escape from the world in order to be free from pain. It's, as I say, it's that is, if you try to think about what kind of joy comes from the absence of pain, you say, well, what is it that you really can do in the world that doesn't really bring pain? What about just eating and drinking? You eat a meal, and about 4 hours later, you begin to get hungry again. Now, hunger is a form of pain. It's a deprivation of something that you desire. Hunger isn't a pleasure. Thirst is not a pleasure. It isn't pleasant to be thirsty. But if you're not thirsty, there's no pleasure in drinking. If you're not hungry, there's no pleasure in eating. The pain seems to be a necessary part of life. If you're not tired, you can't sleep. But nobody wants to be tired. Tiredness isn't something pleasurable at all. So what are you going to do? It's a terrible dilemma to just be free from hunger. It doesn't mean the same thing as eating a good meal. It means to be free from hunger. I don't know what you do. Eat a little bit continuously, like a.
Well, actually, Lucretius was abstemious.
Yeah,
and again, very much the ascetic. Epicureans are often accused of the eat, drink, and be merry.
Oh, yeah. No,
tomorrow you may die. But the real philosophical Epicurean always defends himself from that charge. Oh, no, he said, that's foolish. We are not sensualists. We're not, what are the words for that kind of person? Sybarites. We don't indulge. Quite the contrary. Lucretius says philosophical joy is really ascetic. You withdraw from the pleasures of life and have very few, but the ones that you have, you enjoy for yourself alone. Well,
Well, he says most of all. You see, he says most of all, it is being there by yourself, alone in the tower. Above all, stoutly fortified by the teaching of the wise, and to gaze down on others who are not
isn't
wise.
that true? It's that there is a kind of despising of the rest of the world. After all, if someone else weren't drowning, you wouldn't have half the pleasure in being safe. I don't know if I'm expressing that very clearly, but there is something really horrible in all this. That is, you enjoy someone else's trouble because you don't have it.
Yeah, he says not. Yeah, he tries to get around that.
Yeah.
But it's still true. That is, in other words, a man like this, you say, well, supposing we could take you to a land where there weren't people drowning in the sea. Suppose we could take you to a happy valley where people are not struggling. Would you be happy? That is, you would not have that.
You wouldn't have that philosophical gazing down on that poor guy drowning in the surf.
You say that wouldn't be happening he would not be happy in paradise. No. This man, the animals wouldn't be eating each other, and fighting with each other. There wouldn't be any sin in the world. That is, Lucretius is a man who says, well, I really wouldn't be happy in heaven.
We're not talking when we say philosophy, and we're talking here in literature, but this is not an imaginary thing. That is, let's think about this in terms of the real world we actually live in. You will, if you look around you, you will find that there are Epicureans in the real world, and it may be that there's even a little of an Epicurean in yourself. That is, this possibility lies within all of us. I certainly know among Christians, for example, and especially among the best, let's say, among the elect, that is, among Christians whom we would call devout, pious, religious, daily communicants, ones who give themselves over to the readings of the saints and so on, that this actually becomes a kind of strange Christian temptation. It's a complete error. You find it among religious.
Well, one of the symptoms of it is the symptom of beginning to think of other people who are not doing these things, who are not devout, as being poor wretches out there struggling and hopeless, and you begin to take a greater pleasure in your own religious devotion by contrast to those people who are out in the gutter, people who are out there living sinful lives. It's the temptation toward Puritanism.
Yes.
The Puritan always does this. The Puritan always looks out there and says, look at all those.
He's a type, but he's a real man,
yes.
And we know him. And as I say, we can be tempted by it ourselves. That is, isn't it I don't know, I'll just ask it as a question. If you really honestly examine your conscience and think about it, haven't you done this? That has taken a great pleasure in the fact that you were so close to God and that you were praying. Here I am in a church, and I'm on my knees and I'm praying. I really do thank God that I'm better than everybody else. I mean, it's of course what the Pharisee says in the.
He says, I'm not like this man. He says, I'm not like this man, too. That is, you walk out into the street and you look at the people hustling by, going off to their pleasures, and you say, you see, they're all lost. And you're in that citadel, in that church, and that it gives you a great satisfaction to realize that, in the most extreme kind of Calvinist interpretation, I'm saved. The rest of these people are damned. They're lost. But that, even though that's an extreme, nevertheless, it's certainly very, very common.
It is, and also the Epicurean Christian who takes great pleasure in withdrawing from the world. That is, it's very difficult to distinguish. You pick up St. John of the Cross and read the ascent of Mount Carmel, and especially the first chapters, where he says, now the thing to do is to withdraw from the world, to treat the world as if it was dead, to take no pleasure in food, to take nothing, to withdraw from this and withdraw from that. And you think, well, gee, isn't this exactly what Epicurus says? That is, you're not supposed to enjoy anything. You're not supposed to take pleasure in anything. If you take pleasure in anything, that's wrong. We're supposed to exterminate all pleasure, because pleasure is the evil itself. Desire nothing. St. John of the Cross says that. Desire nothing. Well, we certainly do have to distinguish. I think that one of the distinctions we have to make is that he's a long way beyond us. And we better go back to square one before we take that up.